Greetings, students! Thank you for joining me for this week's Office Hours. This is a bi-weekly program where I answer your questions regarding the mysteries of this world. This is our, seventh or so installment, and we're recording in the midst of a terrible thunderstorm, so if you hear a little rumble under the track, don't be frightened. It is only the rain. Let's dive in. Echo asks, strange how right after talking about the ionosphere and weather modification, NASA launches the Viper experiment into the ionosphere. Maybe these are related. For those who may have not caught last week's episode, Echo is referring to the ionospheric discussion that we had last episode, particularly about thunderbirds. I do think that it is possible that these things are related. Experience tells me that as I've grown keener, I'm able to spot the meanings in synchronicities more easily. I think that stitching up these meanings is part of the active work of expanding oneself, so I am excited to engage in that with you here. In any case, I have enough respect for the identification of the coincidence to not interrogate it on its face, but to treat the Viper experiment as worthy of attention. And indeed, there is much to catch the eye, or perhaps the ear. The project consists of a rocket that was launched a week or so ago. At least that is the headline. But they seem to have done a bit to make this particular launch difficult to research. For one thing, they assigned it the same name as an important moon rover that was launched about 1 year ago. Why they should want to reuse the off-putting acronym VIPER so soon after a more major project used it is unknown. The acronym, in this case, stands for VLF Transionospheric Propagation Experiment Rocket. In typical government fashion, they have nested an initialism into the acronym. VLF, in turn, stands for Very Low Frequency and refers to the electromagnetic waves in the 3 to 30 kilohertz range. So the full title would be Very Low Frequency Transionospheric Propagation Experiment Rocket. Quite a mouthful. Let's break this down. Let us begin with something elementary, the distinction between electromagnetic waves and mechanical waves. Our bodies understand both of these types of waves. Electromagnetic waves we understand as light, and mechanical waves we understand as sound. Sound and light, different as they are, both are waves, and so both have the property called frequency, which means how often a wave crests per second. A wave with a frequency of 5 Hz crests 5 times per second, and with 5 kilohertz crests 5,000 times per second. In light, frequency indicates color, and in sound it indicates pitch. The other important factor here is that sight and sound respond to different frequencies of wave. Our ears pick up mechanical waves in the range of 20 to 20,000 kilohertz, while our eyes pick up electromagnetic waves in the range from 430 trillion to 700 trillion hertz. As you likely noticed, these ranges are quite far apart. VLF, however, is a very low-frequency electromagnetic waves, are waves of invisible light that overlap the upper range of human hearing. If human voice boxes were able to vibrate pure electrical energy instead of merely shoving about air molecules, this is the range that would be emitted. This is why I find the mysterious audio artifacts that plague this frequency range to be so interesting. VLF has had the attention of humanity for some 100 years or so, because of its utility in speaking to the depths. Submarines are notoriously difficult to reach with regular electromagnetic radiation. But VLF is able to penetrate deep into salt water in a way that higher spectrums of light cannot do. And so, since the 40s, there has been a marked increase in artificial VLF sending and receiving on this planet. Moreover, VLF tends to bounce off of the lowest levels of the ionosphere, which means that the purity of the signal is preserved in a way that is useful for very long ranges of communication. But when scientists switched on their listening boxes to translate the electromagnetic waves into sound, they found something that they didn't expect. Strange noises known as whistlers appeared in the monitoring stations. So eerie were these sounds that Robert Hallowell, a Stanford electrical engineer in the 1950s, referred to them as weird, strange, and unbelievable as flying saucers. The same interruptions were detected over Jupiter in the late 90s. Listening closer, an entire complex conversation was heard. Investigation led the scientists to conclude that for the first time, they were hearing the true voices of lightning. The cry of the thunderbird, as opposed to thunder. So pronounced were these voices that a lightning strike in Dallas could be heard as far away as Moscow. But the various Wikipedia articles on VLF are riddled with inconsistencies and paradoxes. While the VLF page states that the waves bounce off of the low ionosphere, as I said up above, the Whistler page claims that they bounce off of the plasmasphere, and the page on electron precipitation suggests that they reach beyond that into the magnetosphere. Another strangeness is that VLF seems to have a sustained effect on the sealing off of the Earth. In its capacity as an electron precipitation, it is destroying ozone and locking in greenhouse gases, while simultaneously reinforcing an artificial bubble around the Earth that insulates us from some of the wild contortions of the sun in the forms of solar flares and coronal mass injections. This sealing off in both its benefic and malefic modes is a surprising property of lightning. We are reminded of the voice of the seven thunders prophesied in Revelation, whose words were kept hidden. And so, with this enhanced understanding, let us return to Viper. The rocket is described as a VLF propagation experiment, but the details regarding its purpose are murky. It is apparently outfitted with sensors to determine exactly what VLF activity is occurring in the higher spheres, but that does not sound like it fits the description as a propagation experiment. It hazily refers to the mission, quote, employing numerous ground-based systems, but makes no mention of what those ground-based systems are or what they will do. VLF is used in communications with submarines, with those deep underground, and with clarity across continents. With what might this Viper communicate from its perch in the magnetosphere? We must keep watching this experiment and see what strange fruits it bears. Let's move on. Mie observes, Crom Dub is apparently associated with the Headless Horseman? This is an interesting development in the Crash Test Dummies series. To refresh your memory, Crom Cruach is the god who, in our reading of the myth, St. Patrick sealed behind the triple spirals of the M51, M51b, and M63 galaxies, and who later returned to wreak havoc on the motorists of this world after having been summoned down by the occult optical instrument, the Leviathan of Parsonstown. I first double-checked to confirm the observation, and it does seem to be a pervasive reading. The evolution follows the general trend of spirits of conquered people transitioning from god to demon to monster. Crom Cruach, the god, seems to have evolved into Crom Dub, the demon, over the course of the Christianization of Ireland. The word dub translating something akin to black or dark. Crom Dub was then further bastardized into the Dullahan, meaning dark spirit or elf, and this was then merged with a spirit called Gan Kean, who was a headless ghost or fairy who carries his own head along with him. The description of the Dullahan from the Wikipedia suggests the jack-o'-lantern which Washington Irving would make the Headless Horseman's head in his Legend of Sleepy Hollow. This reads, the mouth is usually in a hideous grin that touches both sides of the head. Its eyes are constantly moving about, and it can see across the countryside, even during the darkest nights. The flesh of the head is said to have the color and consistency of moldy cheese. This links into the Crash Test Dummies series in a suggestive way that I haven't been able to find a final link for. My suggestion in that series is that Frederick Reese, the Mad Bishop of Detroit, was somehow involved in bringing the revived Crom Cruach to America. The Dullahan, of course, became quite prominent in Washington Irving's story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which made the Headless Horseman into an American staple. This story was published around the same time as the discovery of the Dowris Hoard, which we believe may have translated some essence of the spirit to the 3rd Earl of Ross, who discovered that hoard, or on whose land it was discovered. In any case, in the legend of Sleepy Hollow, the Headless Horseman is the reanimated body of a Hessian, a German mercenary who fought on behalf of the English against the Americans in the Revolutionary War. Frederick Rees had also been a German soldier, who, prior to his ecclesiastical career, had fought Napoleon at Waterloo. It is as though the final connections are pressing on the other side of the wall, pressing against it and attempting to burst through, but I haven't found the final lock to unlock and really set them free. We will continue meditating on this. Thank you for the observation, Mie. Hopefully this will bear fruit in time. Milton Tello asks, Professor, just be straight. Do you really believe that we live in a spinning ball that holds millions of tons of water and that it is also spinning around a giant fireball which is moving through space? Why are you trying so hard to pin me down, Milton? There are several useful hypotheses for this world, but none of them seem to add up. That's just what we're doing here. We follow a vine as long as it bears fruit. I believe the current stance of this channel is that the spheres are actually mathematically simplified versions of complex two-dimensional objects, but that's likely to change as soon as we hear some more interesting possibility. So no, I refuse to simply be straight with you, or go on the record supporting this position or that position. Next question. Patreon subscriber Dayman Woe, in speaking about the failure of New Coke, noted that he, quote, doesn't believe the institutions that funded the research to create a chemical that makes someone more susceptible to subliminal messages would quickly discard it. I appreciate your sincere engagement, Dayman. I like this point very much, and it inspired me to dive back into the New Coke research and see what I might unearth. To bring up to speed any viewers who are not, New Coke was signaled to us as a suspicious development because of the patronage of Max Headroom, who was theorized to be part of a larger and more detailed project. Specifically, we suggested that New Coke contained in it a chemical that made individuals who drank it more susceptible to subliminal messages, and that the increased sweetness of the soda was in order to mask the effects of this stupefying chemical. New Coke was a famous disaster, and whatever elements were attempting to use it within Coca-Cola Company were thwarted by whatever elements preferred to retain market dominance. And New Coke was then discontinued a mere 2.5 months after its introduction in July of 1985. However, 5 years later, there was another strange failed promotion at Coca-Cola, which may be the next step in the plan to disseminate whatever it was that was the subtle ingredient in New Coke. This was the Magic Can promotion that was part of Coca-Cola's broader Summer of Magic in 1990. The promotion was boldly named, especially considering that the country was in the grip of the Satanic Panic at the time. However, these larger cultural things often go unnoticed by the illuminated masters who set these plans in motion. In this promotion, a person opening their can of Coca-Cola would be surprised to discover a prize erupt from the can. Money or a redeemable certificate for, say, a hat. However, for some reason, they didn't want to actually immerse the prizes in their product, but they didn't want to have cans that obviously lacked liquid either, as that would make the prize cans easy to distinguish, or so they say. And so, you might think, they would fill the cans with water that they already have a vast supply of in their production pipeline. Think again! They filled the cans not with Coke nor water, but with, quote, a mixture of chlorinated water and a foul-smelling substance to discourage drinking. Snopes identifies this foul-smelling substance as ammonium sulfate, aka mascagnite, a substance created around volcanoes and coal seam fires. Are we again in a place where this is a mere masking agent and the hidden ingredients are the real culprits? Or was ammonium sulfate's role as a protein purifier used here? The use of proteins does seem a compelling avenue for this research, but I'm afraid, for now, this trail has gone cold. At least insofar as I am able to follow it. Thank you for spotting this next step in the path, Dayman. This is the slow progress that eventually leads us somewhere inevitable. Katina Birdcage asks, is it the power of suggestion? I ask Professor Smythe. My inquiring mind would like to know. Is it indeed? A question may be more convincing, at times, than an answer. The interrogative mark has a burrowing power, and provisional solutions have a way of calcifying into deeply held convictions. Suggestions are mere pointers, and when we follow them and get somewhere by our own locomotion, we tend to forget the suggestion that led us there in the first place. The most dangerous ones, of course, are the suggestions that are both unintended and unperceived. These are the whispers of the Illuminati. They can enmesh us so deeply into their schemes that we not only believe that it is our purpose, but it actually does become our purpose. Even freedom becomes suspicious in this light. So is it the power of suggestion? All I can say is, it may be. Mai asks, Professor, what do you think about the Hermes Birkin bag? It's an insanely overpriced bag. The cheapest ones go for $20,000, I think. They say it costs that much because they're handmade. But you can get handmade bags for much cheaper. The brand Hermes is also suspicious. Hermes is considered the protector of merchants, thieves, and travelers. Hermes is the Greek equivalent of Thoth and Mercury. Hermes being the protector of travelers is interesting, since Jean-Louis Dumas designed the bag after being seated next to Jane Birkin on a plane. Her straw bag got destroyed and she complained about not being able to find a leather bag she liked. But people now buy them as an investment. What makes this bag in particular so special? This is an exemplary question, Mai, and the research you've already begun on it shows great promise. I'd like specifically to praise the fact that I have not seen this material discussed anywhere else. It is something that, in your own experience, struck you as strange, and which you began to investigate and put the clues together on. Mai? A+. To expand a little on the background of Hermes, I will note that he is also a significant patron of magic. Haha, I mean, Hermes is a specific patron of magic, especially in his syncretism with Thoth and Mercury. He is meant to be the god that first taught magic to the ancient sages. Other correspondences to the domains of Mercury exist within this company as well. In addition to those you have noted, it is clearly a merchant house, and the Birkin bag was associated with travel in its origin story. But travel has long been a part of the company's wares and branding. It was originally founded as a saddle-making company, and to this day advertises its special saddle stitch, which it claims is not duplicable by machine. The bags were also subject to a large criminal counterfeiting operation, which is interesting in light of Hermes' dominion over thieves. I think especially that this kind of thievery is appropriate to Hermes the trickster. Several employees of Birkin were fired following this counterfeiting scandal, which suggests that the company's employees themselves were involved in the manufacture of the fake bags. However, at the point where the same people were making the bags to look identical, what exactly was counterfeited? The ephemerality of what was quote-unquote stolen from the company, in this case, is a fine piece of glamour. The Wikipedia article for the bag tells us that its most expensive rendition is made of a combination of goat and crocodile skin. The crocodile bags were thrown into the public spotlight in 2014 when Jane Birkin, the bag's namesake, asked for her name to be removed from the bag until conditions regarding the crocodile farms were improved. One is reminded of the ancient cult of Sobek, the Egyptian crocodile god. In his name, crocodiles were venerated in life and mummified in death. The company Hermes, of course, has more sophisticated means of preserving the crocodile's physical remains than did the ancient Egyptian priests. The goat also has his association with the god Hermes through the person of Hermes' son Pan. I find it very interesting that Pan and Sobek were both extremely sexual deities. Sobek's name is derived from the verb to impregnate, and his epithets include the Lord of Seamen and he who eats while he also mates. Significantly, for the Hermes connection, another epithet was he who loves robbery. Pan, meanwhile, was very well known for his overwhelming sexuality. The partially extended into modern demonology in the form of Leonard, the goat demon said to oversee the witches' orgies at the Black Sabbaths. Leonard also takes us back around to Hermes. Both are spirits who are said to initiate the uninitiated into the secrets of magic, though in very different epochs. The Wikipedia page on Leonard strangely claims that at banquets in honor of the demon, fetal goats are boiled with reptiles in order to create an evil concoction. So what does this all boil down to? Is Hermes employing ancient magic by combining the leathers of ritually significant animals in the production of their overpriced bags? Is the reason that their stitch is so important and impossible for a machine to replicate because there are certain occult requirements that give a virtue to the bag which make people willing to pay a year's worth of wages for it? Is the sexual potency of the bag a vortex drawing in the sexually frustrated upper classes who are able to afford it? This is also interesting in light of the method of determining the fakes. Apparently, the thing that distinguished the counterfeits most easily was the lock and key mechanism, which the defecting Hermes employees were apparently not able to replicate. This seems an unnecessary addition to the bag, particularly because they are styled in such a way that the key is meant to travel with the bag. The ritual of inserting a lock into a keyhole seems to me to be likely a sexual displacement, and perhaps magically reinforces whatever sexual energy the bag has repurposed in its users to the wallets of the Hermes firm. If any of you, my viewers, have come into contact with a Birkin bag, I should be most interested to hear your experiences. Our final question comes from Patreon subscriber Frank Haba. Frank, welcome to the Patreon. Frank asks, I have a question for you about one of your recommended books, James Joyce's Finnegans Wake. I'm currently engaged in a study of Ulysses and plan to move on to the Wake afterward. If I'm remembering correctly, Robert Anton Wilson claimed that certain aspects of the Wake were prescient, with Joyce exhibiting knowledge he could not possibly have known at the time of the composition. I would like to hear your thoughts on this. This ties into a broad topic of interest of mine, and one which this channel has been exploring for some time. Most significantly, in a recent episode, we discussed the possibility that Back to the Future, the film, predicted 9/11, the international catastrophe. This notion is of a piece with the purported prophetic powers of Finnegans Wake. Finnegans Wake is more or less a novel that came together in its final form in 1939. It was written by the Irish-European James Joyce, and while its plot is by no means a settled question, the most popular and digestible theory is that it describes the night's sleep of an innkeeper who lives and works with his wife and 3 children in the Dublin village of Chapelizod. However, the style of the book is extremely intense. Joyce mixes multilingual puns into a weird language whose meanings are totally unstable. While a phrase may seem to make sense one way, it is perfectly reasonable to read it another way, and distant parts of the text may require simultaneously different interpretations of a single passage. Those who dispute that it is the single most difficult and complex work in the English language do so for the most part on the premise that it is meaningless, a premise that does not hold up to the critical evaluation of the last 80 years. The author himself occasionally referred to his own writing as prophetic. In several letters, he refers to the resurgence of Finland as being foretold in his book. You can see it right there in the title, Finn Again Wakes. And in the book, that specific subject is treated in more detail. But there are other more interesting prophecies embedded in the work as well. It supposedly foretold bits of history as diverse as the triumph of Tiger Woods at the annual Masters Tournament in Augusta, Georgia, the quote-unquote elevation of the Batman franchise at the hands of Christopher Nolan, and the use of the atomic bomb in World War II. To this end, I think we can say with confidence that Finnegans Wake is no less, and likely quite a bit more, useful of a means for divination as tarot cards, Rorschach tests, or other random input devices. Especially for individuals with a strong verbal intelligence, the way that Joyce's weird language pulses and writhes opens up the intuitive faculties in a way that it is hard for other words to do. Poetry achieves this syntactically as a matter of course, but Joyce does it on the level of the individual word, and then compounds that slipperiness with syntax and a broader polysemous communication strategy that incorporates other aspects of the literature, including genre, character, plot description, place, listing, quotation, etc. Joyce references the Akashic record several times in this work, and that is another frame that we might view the book's prophetic potential through. We've been talking on this channel much about the notion of reality and the mind as twin holograms. The mind being an inferior network that still provides a sort of corresponding map to reality, which can give one access to more than they've properly been exposed to. The relevance here would be that Joyce, a verbal genius of foremost stature in the history of the world, was so given over to this mode of being, a verbal mode of being, that this dimension of his hologram was extremely lucid. And the maps from this book, which constituted as complete an expression of his entire interiority as he could muster, intersected the world of his past and future in ways that he himself could not even be aware of. I think there is another interesting angle on the predictive powers of this work as well. It is something that Grant Morrison, the comic book writer, refers to as the hypersigil. This is the phenomenon that an author of a work experiences the events of the characters in their work. Grant Morrison noted that during the composition of The Invisibles, he wrote a character who went through certain experiences that he himself went through. When he wrote a story of that character going through a crisis, he himself was visited by all sorts of bad luck. He then resolved only to write good fortune for that character, and his own life mimicked the upswing. Morrison then attempted to broaden this into a generalized uplifting of society, though I don't think we can say that he was broadly successful in this endeavor. At least, not yet. A somewhat similar event is recounted by James Joyce, who, after writing a very emotionally charged passage about a river dying by emptying itself into the sea, claimed to feel the blood rush out of his brain and be overtaken by a paralysis that lasted, in his words, a long while. While the hypersigil theory is more limited in scope, it seems more forceful in its potency, and I wonder if it might not expand somewhat when a person has the voice of a nation. Could it be that Grant Morrison's attempts to broaden his hypersigil did work, but only to the community for which he was the voice? The comics industry has at least achieved a broader cultural impact since the 90s when Morrison was publishing this comic. Regardless, The Wake is a fascinating book, and it would be interesting to dive in and explore what futures we could divine and test from it. If there's any interest in some sort of Finnegans Wake book club, let me know in the comments, and perhaps we'll think about putting something together. That's it for this week, my students. Thank you again for joining us. Please like and subscribe, and if you have a question, just jot it down below. Join us on the Patreon if you like, in order to support this channel and gain access to bibliographies for the episodes and esteemed status for your questions. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, may you bask in the sun of wisdom, just as do our reptile overlords.